fundamentally, I will now pick up some points which were discussed in the previous panel. The way the work is changing is having a tremendous impact on talent management itself. Today, she mentioned about the pressures and margin, the business, the whole dynamics is changing, the product, the services, the way the market response is changing. And what that is doing is creating an immense amount of pressure on HR professionals to understand an individual's role, because the role itself is not stationary anymore. Our entire talent management strategy is built on, let's say, the chair. That's the role, that's the fundamental unit around which you say, okay, the person is sitting here, and how do I, make sure that the person's individual size aspirations in the chairs, what the chair is able to provide, and challenges and rewards are there. So that's one challenge, and therefore, one challenge we are facing today is, how do you define the role and the delivery so clearly that the person who is into that understands that? His life begins with that clarity of definition, whether I hire him, whether I assign him a role, whether I give him his careers, whether I change it midway, whether I tell him where he's going to go. So that's one big challenge. The second challenge that we are facing is that an average tenure, and I'm talking of, let's say, mid-level employee, I'm not talking of very senior leaders, an average tenure of a mid-level employee is reducing. 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. And people nowadays you interview don't mind saying that in their 20 years they have worked in 8 different companies. And that's no longer something to be, feel awkward about. If that is the reality that we take, that means the total time I have with an individual to align him to my internal culture, to make sure that he understands what he needs to deliver, to give him enough developmental input so that he delivers, and then he walks out, is another challenge, which is again shaping a lot of, things that we are trying to do internally. The third thing today that's happening is, while we keep talking about leadership, and I experience that at all levels, that when we keep talking about leadership and the way it is defined, and we know in an abstract manner that these 5, 6 things are there which is key to leadership. What we continuously need to factor in today, that a large number of people grow up into functional leadership. So as they talk about functional leadership, their perspective about what business should be and how we should respond is going to be defined by which functions they have come from. Like in HR, we are talking about that. But today when you talk about, and Raju talked about, how do we prepare them for future very quickly give them, and Adil was also talking about that. So the challenge that we are facing is, how do I increase the breadth of exposure and perspective of a person so that his personal desire about attaining a leadership position and his readiness is very high. And the last challenge today is, last challenge that I would like to speak about is again related to, this kind of dynamic situation is really taking our understanding of succession to a different level altogether. Existing models are continuously being stressed, and therefore for us to be able to really work at a fundamental level, not on a piece of paper exercise level where you pick a box and put 3 people beside that. These are the great challenges that is facing us. And what we are trying to do in our own way is to ensure that we create a kind of cadre of leadership which it's challenging, but which is what I call sector independent and function independent. That as a concept, it's taking a little time to get into. People who walk into these kinds of programs and buy into this in a long term keep facing their existential crisis every year. And second, because ultimately it looks nice if you tell people, do you want a general manager management where you want we will grow up to be a CEO, and they say yes. And then 2 years later, I want to go to power sector. I want to do FMCG marketing. So while we are trying to do that and we are experimenting with that, it has required a lot of patience and is still work in process.
Yeah, thank you. And Rajendra, sorry you've been the last seat next to me. But your challenges are much more different because your industry is an emerging business. At the same time, you also have a lot of challenges being regulated industry as well. And your workforce also is going to be a lot younger than other industries are. How you are planning to handle this?
Sure, thank you. I think a couple of caveats. I think the earlier panel had set the ball rolling in terms of our thinking. While of course no one can predict the future for themselves, but I'm still witnessing. I'm sure a lot of will agree that a lot of boardrooms still talk about 2025 and 15 was the earlier one, but now 2020, 2025 as a strategy. So I'm sure, I mean, for the talent, what kind of talent should you have in a particular kind of industry? By the way, my view, a very strong view, is that it's not one size fits all, correct? Different industry, different issues today. And a lot of, I guess, the renowned consultants, they do research as well, correct? They compare India versus China. Let's say for my sector, we think that if China, being such a big country, probably a little different in political, kind of scenarios, but like us, maybe the depths of the GDP, if they have about 5 insurance players, 2 states, maybe another 2 private, why should India have 25? Today we have them with one, big daddy called LIC. Now, people would start predicting that in how many years, if you, in this sector, would you get to that, if at all you get to, correct? So I think people are predicting future in a particular industry. So I think my view is in terms of getting to the talent requirement and the kind of talent that you require right from the CEO to the frontline salesperson. I think a little bit of thinking around the macroeconomics, the political stability or instability, the social issues, correct? I mean, we have a little bit of, let's say, wow to say that by 2035, India is one of the countries will have most youngest, population or young population. Is it going to be a liability or an asset? Correct? It all depends on what do we do. In fact, some people have said, how do you make people, happy? Because unless we are internally happy, seldom we can probably make the external customers happy. So it's a vicious circle. Coming back to, I think, the talent in the sector that we work in is different. I mean, you will get surprised. I think some of you are aware of it. While we are, let's say, one of the top, few companies to, let's say, work for in terms of the growth, we are also one of the best companies to work for. But if you know the data, and most of us in private phase, out of, let's say, 100, I have 20,000 employees, 80% let me say this, 140+% per annum, imagine. And balance, the managerial one, they are like any other good company, maybe about 12, 13% per annum. Now these are 2 different buckets that we have. And the top battalion manages this, bottom one, correct? Now, what kind of talent will you require there, correct? And intrinsically, I mean, as I agree with Sudhakar, in fact, as HR, we do think, though of course we expect somebody to retire from the company, we do think there is an employee life cycle of about 3 years, plus minus. So we must understand that when we recruit the person, while he or she might commit against the, kind of interview that I'm here for the long term, but for sure, in terms of his or her intrinsic interest, so to say, very, very underlined statement, what is the person thinking? I mean, the person thinks 2.5, 3 years, depending on where he or she comes from. So knowing that, whether it is recruitment and development, whether it is succession planning, all that I think we take into consideration and we frame our strategy. And we are very clear. We have recently talked about the succession planning as a risk requirement, by the way, because the board actually reviews that. But again, I'm sure many of us have experienced the 9 blockers. People have actually used that. But many of them have not even understood what the HM, I don't know, I mean, people got lost into that, correct? And ultimately it boils down to, are you able to afford the succession planning in a kind of industry you are? To get, let's say, I mean, in some of the Western world, people say, and of course we started following that, the RAG analysis, correct? That if you have 2 named successors for a critical position, then you are green. In my company, my industry, probably in my country, if I had to have those 2 named successors at the senior level, will I be able to keep them engaged if the box is not vacant for next about 2 years? That's the question. I think we at times go away from the, the what you call the vastavata, in what they say, to the kind of concepts. And hence, I think we are saying the workforce of one, again the semantic. And if you ask me, I think I happen to work, let's say, in early 80s, early 90s with those companies where the head of HR, very senior person, I mean, some of us are here, would actually take a list of people and walk into the MD's office and say, you know, this one, this one, this one. So if you ask me about 25 years back what people used to do and what people are now thinking, the workforce of one concept, what is it? Is it different? It's not different, but now it's differently put, correct? What are we doing? We're saying, okay, this individual, he or she, would contribute to the top line to the extent of, let's say, 100 crore. So this person will be viewed differently. That's a talent, correct? And that's what we're doing today. And in my view, I think that kind of nurturing, that kind of screening, do we have the relevant conversations? Of course, while we should have as HR, a lot of machines going into your back end in terms of all these concepts. But ultimately, what is important, that are we able to have relevant conversations with the talent so that he or she able to contribute, as somebody said, and add value to the organization. I think that's what we actually keep doing. And incidentally, my CEO, who was actually awarded as the CEO of the HR orientation, he looks at it. So at the top level, we only keep thinking about it, saying that, okay, observe the people, ensure that the relevant conversations really happened at each level, and then, let's say, get to that so-called succession planning in your own way, but not the book. Thank you.
So, thank you. So, in a way, I think talent for India is not going to be a traditional process like the way we've been seeing, other part of the world. I think every company has to look at differently, and they cannot simply go by the 9-box theory, as you said. They can't simply go by simply giving them compensation to retain the employees. But most important, all these things has to wrap up back to productivity for the company, and make sure that earlier talked about innovation. Make sure you create disruption within the company, so you are going to be more competitive, not only within India but also globally. The day we're not competitive globally, end of the day, earlier panel also talked a lot about it, we may end up retiring our own products within the country. So with that, thank you very much for the panel. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.